everyone. I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your AMAC podcast, Better for America. Today, we have with us Will Chamberlain. Now, Will is a senior counsel at the Internet Accountability Project, whose mission is to lend a conservative voice to the calls against big tech. And the Article 3 Project, which looks to defend rule of law and constitutionalist judges. Will, it's an honor to have you with us here today. Thank you so much for joining us. Welcome to the show.
Yeah, great to be with you.
The projects, Will, that you're working on, really fascinating. You worked previously as an attorney in Washington, D.C., and now you're focusing primarily on these two projects. Tell us some more about the Internet Accountability Project, or IAP, and the Article 3 Project.
Sure. So the Internet Accountability Project was formed to fight against the abuses of big tech from the right. Historically, right-wing think tanks have generally been extremely pro-business and anti-regulation. But I think during the Trump presidency, conservatives became very aware that that position was very risky and dangerous for conservatives themselves, because the big tech companies were using the freedoms that they had to censor conservatives and otherwise try and remove us from the public square. And so for a long time, in an individual capacity, had been pushing against this type of censorship all the way back in, I think, 2018. I launched a petition to protect free speech in the digital public square on the White House website that got over 100,000 signatures. And once my colleague, Mike Davis, Chuck Grassley's former aide during the Kavanaugh confirmation fights, once he started IAP, I thought it was a no-brainer to join. And help actually kind of create institutional force behind this conservative anti-big tech position, which wasn't really being represented very well in the institutions.
Really interesting. It's so important that we do bring light to these issues, and so many of these issues, I think are not spoken about enough. And these projects are doing really good things. I do want to speak with you a little bit about a healthcare merger. This is something that we recently uncovered, and this is an important issue. Some may not be aware that recently the Department of Justice challenged the merger between United Healthcare and Change Healthcare. Now, United Healthcare Group won their court approval for its $7.8 billion acquisition of Change Healthcare. And the merger allows United to control a critical data highway. It's a real win for United Healthcare, essentially giving the largest health insurer access to its competitors' data, which could push up healthcare costs.
The basic problem here is what you identified, which is this ability of the biggest healthcare insurer in the country to gain access to even more consumer data, which gives it this, even strengthens or potentially creates a monopoly position that it would have vis-a-vis other insurers, whereby it has all this consumer data, and so it's able to more, have unique pricing advantages over other companies and otherwise essentially bully smaller companies into doing business on its terms. Very similar to how Amazon uses its monopoly power in retail to bully small entrepreneurs who use its products to essentially give all their data to Amazon. And one of the things that IAP was fighting against about what Amazon was doing is they would essentially force those small entrepreneurs to use Amazon's distribution system, give Amazon all their data about their products, and if Amazon saw one of their products doing well, they would just mimic it and create a low-cost copy and drive that entrepreneur out of business. So we're worried about a similar dynamic at play with this health insurance merger, which we don't think necessarily should have been approved.
Yeah, and when I think about all of the seniors that are currently on a Medicare supplement plan, which essentially fills in the gaps of original Medicare and helps cover your out-of-pocket costs, those Medicare supplement plans are really priced based on, to a great extent, on the status of your health. So when you see that the largest insurer may have access to health records, how might that impact how they price those Medicare supplement plans? It is quite interesting. We'll have to watch this and see how things move along there. I want to talk a little bit more about big tech and news. In your intro, you sort of explained all of the great work that you're doing. And recently, senators were able to strike a deal on a journalism bill, which appears could add protections for conservative media. It's a bipartisan bill. It's intended to give news organizations bargaining power against big tech. It seems it would include protections for conservative media from online censorship. media outlets would be able to negotiate with Google and Facebook, for example. But my question for you is, if this bill is passed, do you feel that it would help to combat the suppression of conservative news, or will it leave news outlets dependent on the government and maybe undermine the credibility of journalists?
So I don't think, the way the bill's constructed, I don't think it will have an effect on censorship one way or the other. There was a potential for a prior version of the bill to make it possible for, in this collective bargaining arrangement, for censorship practices to be negotiated, which would be a big problem for conservatives, because then if there were liberal media outlets leading the collective bargaining efforts, they might have negotiated something that would have hurt the conservative outlets in terms of censorship. So the current bill essentially says that they can do collective bargaining, but they can't do collective bargaining about censorship practices. So it means that the bill doesn't hurt or help censorship. What it does do is it makes it, as you mentioned, allow them to collectively bargain for things like ad rates and how these big tech companies compensate small conservative media outlets. And as someone who actually previously ran a conservative media outlet and has many friends working for conservative media outlets, I can tell you that ad rates are low, and it is extremely hard to make money via that. And a big reason is that Google and Facebook are abusing their monopoly power over advertising in their spheres, Facebook over social media advertising and Google over search advertising. And they're using it to squeeze the publishers who actually go out and create the content that Google and Facebook are making money off of. So this bill, as it's currently constructed, is a good one that would redress some of that balance by allowing these small individual publishers to collectively bargain with Google and Facebook and redress that power imbalance.
Yeah, I like that it's a bipartisan bill. Interestingly, though, I just noticed that Rand Paul just pulled out. I don't know if you saw that, but I'm curious, what would be some of the reasons why someone like a Rand Paul would say, this isn't something I can sign on?
Historically, conservatives have been hostile to collective bargaining and unions. I think that there's a default in the idea that the government would intervene to protect a collective bargaining entity, but that's something that's been going on since the 1950s. And there are actually reasonably good arguments that having some sort of collective bargaining in certain industries where there's a massive power imbalance in the absence of collective bargaining is a good thing. And I think, especially here, where we could actually protect conservative media outlets that really are getting crushed and having a lot of trouble retaining staff, paying decent salaries to writers. We should be trying to pass laws to protect those industries.
Yeah, and we see the tremendous influence of big tech and how their incredible power has really resulted in the suppression of real news, like the Hunter Biden laptop. And luckily, there are patriots like you, Will, who are speaking out. And I want to mention, too, we're seeing these recent polls that are indicating that Americans are losing confidence in our government institutions. Recently, the FBI whistleblowers exposed detailed plans that indicate that the FBI is prioritizing their political investigations over cases of child sexual abuse. I mean, just think about that. If in fact they are prioritizing political investigations over important things like child sexual abuse, that's concerning, certainly is concerning to our members. How is this going to affect the safety of our country? And is there anything that the Article 3 project is doing to combat this deliberate misuse of power?
Well, the funny thing is about the FBI focusing on political investigations over actual criminal investigations is that it's been doing this since the founding of the FBI under J. Edgar Hoover. Attorney generals and presidents, one after the other, tried to get him to focus on enforcing federal law. And instead, he really just wanted to spy on Americans. And I read a great history of the FBI just recently because it's been in the news. And it's fascinating to see the exact same debates we're having now were happening in the 1920s and 1930s when the FBI was investigating radicals rather than enforcing federal law. That said, obviously the prioritization of these political investigations, especially ones that are focused on the prior administration over child sex abuse cases, is clearly appalling. I think Article 3 project, I'm not sure we have an exact proposal for how to just fix the FBI yet. That's a pretty daunting challenge, but certainly it's something we're thinking about. And certainly this has happened before. In the church committee in the aftermath of the Watergate break-ins and also the general investigation of the intelligence community, the FBI was dramatically changed. It went from doing routine black bag jobs, essentially law-breaking, illegal wiretapping, to almost completely getting rid of its counterintelligence function and focusing on federal law enforcement for a period of about 25 years up into the 9/11 attacks. So, there's historical precedent for radical changes in the FBI, and the FBI doing counterintelligence as a law enforcement agency, that's a pretty unique setup that we have in the United States. It largely comes out of J. Edgar Hoover and how he built the institution. Other countries separate those functions. They have a federal police force and they have a counterintelligence agency, and those two are separate and they don't do the same thing. So we should strongly consider some sort of restructuring of the FBI, I think, in order to ensure that it behaves. Yeah,
it does seem that would be a good first step. We've got to think in that way, and I know our membership agrees there. I do want to talk a little bit about hope, because I have hope for America's future. I really do, despite all of the challenges, many of which we just touched on. So my last question for you before we let you go is, since we're less than now 40 days away from November 8th, are you hopeful that we will see a red wave?
I mean, I absolutely am. I know that many of the polls suggest otherwise, but the polls were dramatically wrong in the last 2 to 3 years. I think there's a pretty systematic polling bias against Republicans, especially in the sort of reshuffling of the coalitions that happened with Donald Trump's election. And so I would expect that, given Joe Biden's terrible approval rating and the general shape of the economy, that we should really expect a red wave. And there are some absolutely great candidates out there who are really good on some of the issues we care about. I can just highlight two right off the bat. Blake Masters in Arizona is excellent, as is J.D. Vance in Ohio. They're both very, very, very intelligent and forward-thinking conservatives who are really looking out to protect conservative users' voices. And so, there are other good candidates out there, and I think it's very important, for example, that Dr. Oz win in Pennsylvania, because John Fetterman is absolutely atrocious. But I'm hopeful that we're gonna come out on top.
Well, that's good news, and we are as well here. We're predicting a red wave for sure. Will, this was so nice to have you here with us. I love sitting down with you. Thank you so much for joining us. The Article 3 Project and the IAP are great movements, and they really are spreading awareness against government overreach. They're so vital in our fight for freedom, so thank you for all that you're doing.
All right, thank you so much.
Thank you. And to all of you out there listening, thank you for tuning in today. And by the way, if you're not getting your political news from AMAC, you won't be informed about American politics. You can go ahead and track breaking news and more, like this podcast, by downloading our AMAC News app. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button, follow, like, and share wherever you are on social media. Until next time, I'm Rebecca Weber. This is your podcast, Better for America. Thank you for being here. God bless you. Have a great day, everyone.